Welcome back to our series about Storyist, the creative writing application for macOS and iOS. In the last video, I've shown you how to create a Kindle ebook version of your document, in fact of several documents, to link them together. And in this video, I want to make you aware of a couple of inconsistencies that you will come across and how to remedy those, of course. Let's begin by using the screencast manuscript we've been building over the last few videos here. So in this case we have 4 chapters, all usually with dummy text, and I'm going to start with chapter 1 here, which has a subheading which may be interesting. So let's before we start with the subheading, perhaps we're going to insert a space here and hit the tab key and insert another block of lorem text. So this is something I'm just going to use to demonstrate how the chapter title followed by some text followed by that heading 2 will look formatted as an ebook. And speaking of the heading 2, as soon as we get there, I'm having just one line here, one line on one paragraph, which is called section 1, and I'm going to insert a space here just because I want to demonstrate that these spaces are actually ignored when you convert the document to EPUB or to the Kindle version. So I don't know why, but the ebook readers seem to strip that out, so blank lines are completely ignored, which is something to keep in mind when you're writing, because sometimes you want to insert a blank line to kind of suggest to the reader this is a tiny bit of a break here, not so much a break as a paragraph break, but something slightly larger. And it's one of those things, if you have that kind of writing style, be aware of that, what's going to happen in the ebook conversion. On the PDF conversion, these lines will stay intact, but not on the ebook conversion. And I'm going to do the same here. So we have one section 1 with a space followed by a paragraph, and then I'm going to insert another space here, and I think we've changed this previously to lorem ipsum ipsum, so I'm going to just correct that to lorem and take the second ipsum out here. There we go. And then of course we have a section break with the hash mark. And this is another thing to remember. This is an indication for Storyist to tell us, or to tell the program, this is when your section begins. But of course for an ebook, this section break is going to stay intact, so we're going to see a hash mark there. Let's see how we can remedy all these things. So first of all, let's create an EPUB version of this document now. We do that by going into File, Export, and just like before, we select under the export format, we're going to select ebook, and under the format itself, instead of the Kindle.mobi, we're going to select EPUB document.epub. And then of course at the top here we need to select what needs to go into our document. I've shown you that in the previous video, so I'm not going to repeat that here. I'm just going to select my test manuscript, which is the only thing that we're going to export without a copyright or a title page. So this is already marked as book body, which is fantastic. So I'm just going to go next, and I'm just going to leave that as test manuscript, and the author, I'm just going to call myself anonymous. Hit next. Give it a place where to save it, so perhaps I'm going to save that here in my Dropbox folder under the Kindle Editions folder, and a second or so later it's all done. Let's find that document and open it in Apple iBooks, Apps, under Storyist, and then I've got another subfolder which is called Kindle Editions. Not quite that correct because we've got the test manuscript now an EPUB edition, only 6 kilobytes long, so not that bad. So if I double click on that, that should be opened. There we go. It does in fact in Apple iBooks, and this is what it looks like. So first of all, we have, as soon as we hover to the top of the screen, we have our new table of contents here. So if I click on that, then I get to see the table of contents on the left hand side, and we can see what's happened with the subheading here. So we have chapter 1, we have a subheading, and then of course we have lots of text, and we have other chapters as well. So this is what happens with the subheading formatting. The chapter 1 always starts on a new page, but because this is kind of a header 1 format, and this is kind of a header 2 format, so it looks slightly smaller, and the formatting once again is applied by the e-reader. Works the same on the Amazon Kindle, of course, but it also works the same on other e-readers. So this is now kind of if you're familiar with HTML formatting, this is H1, and this would be H2, and so forth, H3, H4. Those are slightly smaller, but they're still usually centered, and they're formatted in bold and slightly larger than the body text. So we have that, and this does not start on a separate page. If I go and flick my pages, then I can see that chapter 2 here starts on a new page, but this one here, the subheading, does not do that. It inserts a heading, but it does so in line with the rest of the text. So it's a nice formatting aid if you write that way. It's particularly interesting if you do non-fiction, because you can have one chapter about whatever, let's just say the internet, and then you can have a subheading which discusses YouTube and Wikipedia, for example. So, but the other thing I wanted to make you aware of is that between section 1 and my next paragraph, there is no empty line there. Same with the next paragraph. Between this paragraph and the next lorem paragraph, there's no empty line. Paragraphs are indicated once by the indent, as well as by a little bit of space between each paragraph. So that is definitely staying intact, but the empty line is completely gone. So all e-readers, including the Kindle as well as the EPUB readers, will all strip that out. Just something to be aware of. If you write that way, and if you want a little bit of a gap there, then you can't use an empty line. You have to use something else, like either this thing here, the hash mark, which we're going to discuss in a moment, or you're going to have to be inventive and find something else. So yes, that hash mark here, the little section separator, it looks exactly like it did in the Storyist document. So it is technically separating this section because there was something there, so the e-reader acknowledges that, but it may not look like you want it to look. So before you export something as an ebook, you may want to replace that with something else. So remember, you can't replace it with a space, with an empty line, because it is the e-reader will just strip it out and ignore it. But what we can do is perhaps replace that with something along the lines of a few I don't know, these little asterisk marks. If you do that, be aware that anything that you've done here in regards to sections in those chapters, this is going to disappear, because as soon as you remove that, Storyist isn't going to see that as a section break anymore. So it's something to be aware of. I'm going to do it by clicking on my test manuscript over here, and then I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to hit duplicate. And I'm doing that so that I have an exact copy of this test manuscript here. So I've got test manuscript copy. In fact, this folder, that was just for testing, so I'm going to get rid of that folder as well. Even if we wanted to bring it back, I'm going to get rid of the images folder as well here. Ta-da! Perfect. Clear, clutter-free. I like it. Remember that if we wanted to bring any of these documents back, we have the project trash over here that we can, so these documents are still technically there unless we click empty, and then at that point they'll be gone. So just wanted to drive that home again. So I've got my test manuscript copy here, so I can mess around with it, and in it I'm going to now replace this section separator with something else. So I'm going to do that by clicking into the text here somewhere. Anywhere is good as long as I'm in the text, and I'm going to hit Command F, and that will bring up the little search bar up here, which lets me find an iteration of whatever character string I type in here. So in my case, I'm looking for section separator hash marks. That is Alt 3 on the Mac, and it shows me how many iterations of that particular character are occurring, and it then highlights them in yellow. With these little two arrows here, I can go to the next one, to the next iteration, just much like I've shown you on the iOS version of Storyist. So it's exactly the same way that it works. So let's go to the first iteration here. Is that the first one? This is the first one. There we go. And in order to replace that, I can now tick this replace tick box, and then another bar comes up in which I can now type in something else. So what I've found for me, what works quite well, is if I replace that with a few asterisks. So maybe 5 of them. 3 of them will do fine. I'm just going to use 5 of them. And if I'm going to hit, I can either hit replace all. That will work if you're absolutely sure that you've not used the hash mark for anything else. If you have, then you may want to be a little bit more careful and just replace them one by one. So hitting replace will replace this single instance and then go over to the next one like this. If I do that, then the previous one has been, whoops, where was it? It has been replaced, and it's already parking my cursor on the next one, and if I hit replace again, then it will replace that one as well. But if I hit replace all, then all occurrences will be replaced. So if you've used the hash mark for something like referring to supporting actor #3 or something, you know, I've done I don't know, hash 47 iterations of that, or you know, I'm already #1 why try harder, that sort of thing, you know, then be aware that those hash marks will also be replaced if you use replace all. Just something to be aware of. And once you've done that, you can now export the document again as an ebook document, and then, you know, things will look fine. In all honesty, you're probably going to do this exporting at the end of your work, so at that point we can just have a look here. We no longer have these sections that we had in the previous document here. Say in chapter 2 we had 3 sections, in chapter 2 here we only have the first one. In all honesty, once it gets to creating an ebook, you're probably going to be done with the sections anyway, and you know you don't need that outline anymore, because that's going to disappear with it as well, which is why I was suggesting perhaps if you do want to retain those types of notes, please make a copy beforehand, just so that those things are safe in another copy. But in all honesty, if you don't care about that, that's also fine, because in all likelihood you'll be done with the writing process and you may not need your notes anymore. Just again, something to be aware of. And that is how you can do that. If you want to indicate to the reader that your empty lines are actually meaningful, then I'm afraid the only way I know of how to do it, perhaps you know a better way, but the only way I know how to do it is to literally scroll through the document, and every time you do encounter an empty line that is meaningful to you, hit the tab key and insert one of those section separators in there. So use these section separators as an indicator that something is going to happen there, and then replace them with something along the lines of this, if you like. If you're now thinking, well, yeah, those stars, they're kind of nice, but I'd like to use something like along the lines of fleurons, then be aware that e-readers don't really do fleurons very well. They're literally just text machines, and fleurons, they're kind of these little kind of graphical little things that you see on a Jane Austen novel and all that, and that'll work in a PDF document, which we're going to discuss in the next video, but it's not going to work for e-reader, so be aware of that. That's not going to work, that's not going to look good. It's just going to be replaced with one of those big question marks in a box type character, so stay away from that. Even though it will look okay inside the Storyist project and it'll work for PDFs, it will not work for e-reader, so keep it really nice and simple. If you dislike asterisks, then be inventive with perhaps like a dashed line like this, but make something up that's consisting of standard characters. I guess that's what I'm saying. Standard characters can be used, but anything that isn't in the sort of ASCII character set will cause, in all likelihood, will cause an issue. You can always try it and then export an EPUB or a Kindle document and then have a look at it on a real device and see what that looks like and see if it floats your boat, basically. That's all I have at the moment about formatting tips for ebooks. Those two things are to be aware of: the way heading 1 and heading 2 styles start in the document, the way section separators are dealt with, and that they're going to be coming across as the hash mark that you've put in and that you may want to be replaced, and also that e-readers ignore empty lines in your document. Join me for the next video in which we're going to be discussing how to create a PDF document, print ready or for sharing. Join me for that.